What's up, everyone? True Techno Gamer here. Happy to report on part 3 of my Journey to Endgame Speakers series. Okay, so this is my build up to finally getting what I hope to be my Endgame speakers. And what does that mean? It means different things, but hopefully speakers that I feel I will not need to upgrade or go anywhere further than for a long time. Keep in mind my current speakers are 15 years old, so these speakers should last at least that long, if not noticeably longer. So we are talking a long time. So for the last part, and I've kind of hinted at this, you probably, if you listen to the first 2 parts, okay, you're probably thinking, yeah, of course he's gonna try to promote, the speakers that he likes and speakers that he chose, and Paradigm Persona. Yeah, they seem nice, but there's so many other speakers out there, and there's so many other brands out there, and there are other speakers that sound better and look better and do so much more, even for near the price, or whatever have you. There's a lot of haters out there, let's be honest, about Paradigm, especially in terms of like high-end music, audiophile land. A lot of people don't consider Paradigm to be a true audiophile hi-fi company because they focus in on so much. Paradigm has a really broad range of speakers, come from really entry level $100, $200 stuff, all the way up to the Persona line, right? And they've always focused on home theater as well. So they have, speakers and subwoofers and center channel surround speakers and, custom installed stuff. I mean, they have a lot of different things. But when you compare them to, the really high-end stuff of like a Magico or a Focal Utopia brand or stuff like that, some people say, yeah, Paradigm Persona, nah, they don't even take it seriously. I've literally been laughed out of the virtual room on forums, trying to talk about Persona. So this video is, I think pretty valuable. If you're someone that's looking at speakers, audio equipment in general, and especially hi-fi, I mean, it matters the cost and the level that we're talking about here. I'm going to share with you guys my process in terms of how I evaluated these various speakers, the kind of how I approach the process of looking to, what speakers I wanted to get. And it really just comes down to research and experience, getting hands-on. You guys have seen, on our channel, I've been to these various audio shows where I'm exposed to literally hundreds of audio equipment and probably well over 100, 200, different speaker brands. Things like, Capital Audio Fest and Exponia. I visited my dealers to listen to whatever I could get my hands on, whatever they had in store. Now, granted, I haven't had anything in my house to really, evaluate, until I probably, get the Persona. But everything that I could do, I've done in terms of doing my due diligence. I've approached it mentally saying, everything is open, which it was, right? I wasn't, I didn't, until I got something in my house, Persona or otherwise, it's all open. And I wanted to find, I just wanted to find the speaker that really did it for me, that really spoke to me, that said, this is what you need to do. That's what this is all about. Whatever that was. And even going to Exponia, you heard me talk about, I'm looking at speakers that are really way out my price range now. But it's important to know in my head, like, oh my God, that speaker, that sound, that whatever it is, that speaks to me. That's the dream. That's what I want. And then the answer may be, maybe I can't achieve the dream right now because I can't afford that. But I know in my mind that's something to aspire to, and I'll keep tabs on it, so to speak, right? Everything was open, guys. And, I decided on to Persona after years, literally years and years of pondering and evaluating and listening and researching and etc. So I have a rhyme, a method to my madness, so to speak. Now, granted, I'm an engineer, for those that don't know. So, yes, I'm going to approach this much more scientifically and try to be much more data-driven. So I'm going to show you how I broke down, how I evaluated several speakers. Now, I'm not going to touch on every speaker I've ever heard in the past, 5, 10 years or whatever it is. There are a lot. Some of them I don't have all the data on, whatever. But what I did is I did put together a nice list and table of a good number of speakers. Somewhere on the order of 20 speakers. Actually, I think it's close to like 17. I think I'm gonna show that I evaluated that fits very specific areas in audio. They're near the price of Persona. Some of them are way more expensive, but they still have something that is worth evaluating in my mind. But I covered all the bases. I got all the big names that you might expect: Vocal, Bowers and Wilkins, Monitor Audio, Revel, Magico, etc. And then of course Kef, Per Listen, which is a relatively newcomer, Sanus Faber, and then Tide and Dolly, which are a little bit more niche. So I have wide coverage. Sometimes, some cases, I have multiple speakers for each brand, and I'm gonna go into like how I looked at them and how they compared, in my opinion, to the Persona, and ultimately why I felt the Persona was still the best for me. Granted, this is for me. That's the key point there. May not be for you, but I think it's still valuable just to see how I approached it. And if you kind of took a similar approach, you might be surprised in terms of what you ultimately conclude when you do your evaluation. But at the end of the day, it's still all about listening and hearing and seeing for yourself, right? So with that said, before I get to the table, and I'm just going to show the table, kind of walk through it with you guys and talk about it. Before I get to that, let me just set the stage here. In terms of the categories that I looked at evaluating these speakers in, there's a couple areas. The first and most obvious one, I call it music performance. And I'm really going to say music performance instead of just general performance, because a lot of the speakers that in this price range, in this class, is really about getting the absolute utmost performance out of your music. It doesn't take a lot of the technology and craftsmanship, to be honest, that goes into these speakers that are costing 5-6 figures. It doesn't take all of that to get a really, really premium, super high-end home theater experience, which is why you see a lot of home theater focused speakers generally being a lot cheaper, right? Most movie soundtracks are not real sounds anyway, so it doesn't take all of this. So when you start looking at the $10,000 plus range, especially, a lot of whatever they're doing with the cabinet construction, driver construction, and materials, etc., they're really focusing on music. And I think that's probably the bigger area to evaluate. And when I'm going to all of these shows, they're playing music. They're not, there's nothing to do with home theater. None of them were on a home theater at all. And a lot of these companies you'll see, they don't even have a home theater component. Like, in other words, they don't make a center channel, matching center channel. They don't make bookshelves in some cases. They don't have subwoofers. They're not looking for home theater. So music performance is really just performance, but I'm really focusing on just the musicality of the speaker. How close did the speaker come to giving me that true emotional connection to the music? That's really what it's about. And if you achieve that, you know what I'm talking about. But when you really sit there and listen to a killer system, the music is just universal. It's a love language, but it will grab you. It will do things to you, it's amazing. And I'm looking at how close I can get to that with some of these speakers. So that's music performance. The next is home theater potential, I'm calling it. Home theater potential, the reason why I say that is because, again, if a speaker is made that can produce music well, it's going to be producing good sound for home theater. A good speaker is a good speaker at the end of the day. However, there are some other considerations to think about when you look at home theater. Aesthetics plays a part in it in terms of size, colors, right? Ideally for home theater, if you really have a dedicated home theater, you want speakers to be invisible. So either black or something close to that's not very visible even when lights are out. Something that if you want to put behind a screen or end wall, it has to be, you can't have some crazy 300-pound, 8-foot tall speaker, not going to achieve that. Also, drivability. Most home theaters may have a receiver. They may have, more entry-level amplification, which is fine. Something that can produce a lot of power, but just may not have all of the detail and precision and speed and transients that you care about for music. You just want lots of power, dynamic capability. But if you have a speaker that's very low impedance and low sensitivity, it's going to require a lot of power and really, really beefy amplifiers to even come close to giving you like a really dynamic home theater experience. So again, those speakers that really focus on music and are difficult to drive, they're not going to be good for home theater. So that's what I'm looking at several things when I say potential. How easy and how good would it be for these speakers to serve the purpose as my primary home theater speakers? And I'll go into it when with each speaker as I go down. Aesthetics, of course, I touched on that. Size, weight, just overall attractiveness, the wife acceptance factor, all of these things just in terms of how they appeal to me. Again, it's pretty subjective. Price, of course, some things are great, but they're just completely out of whack. And in some cases, I don't see the justification for them being as expensive as they are. So it's kind of a value proposition I'm looking at here. Can I justify it or not? And is it anywhere near my price range? All right. And then this last category is what I'm calling in-game status. And essentially what I'm looking at there is, in my heart, with what I know, if I got said speaker, how would I feel in terms of really calling them an in-game speaker? In other words, how likely am I to feel that I still need to upgrade when I get said speaker? What else is there to upgrade to, from this speaker, right? So I'm looking at that and evaluating, putting a number on that, a ranking on that to say, I get this, I know I'm done, right? Because I already know there's nothing else out there that's really going to be worthy. Now, granted, that doesn't mean in 20 years I have a different house, different room, and aesthetically I want something that looks different or whatever the case may be. Maybe I just care about home theater now or just care about music now. That's a use case thing, okay? And that matters, by the way. Use case matters, okay? And that's important, in my decision as well, and I'll talk about that. But I'm looking for a speaker that can do both home theater and music at a world-class level. And that's not an easy ask. There are plenty of speakers that do each one of those, on each side of those. Very few can say they can do both really well, equally well. And that's my use case. And people say, Paradigm, please, that's not true hi-fi. And I'm like, well, I'm not looking for just true hi-fi. Right? Some of the speakers they would throw out there, I'm like, they have no home theater, capability whatsoever. Like they have nothing to match. I'm having, mismatched stuff, or it's just ridiculously expensive because they're so niche. Right? A center channel was $30,000 by itself and all this stuff. It's like, okay, yeah, no, right? So that's important. That's really, really important. All right, so here it is, guys. Here's the full table I created. I have 17 speakers that I looked at, compared. The top table in blue is basically some key specs that I wanted to look at and evaluate. And then the bottom table is my scoring parameters that I kind of outlined earlier in this video, and includes the scores for the various speakers. So I'm not going to go through every specific cell and row because you guys can kind of see it and digest it. I already kind of have it ranked in order based on these metrics. But I'll kind of go through some highlights and kind of explain some things. So looking at the top table in terms of the specs, key metrics I cared about, price, of course. Everything here is 5 figures, as you see. There's a couple of 6-figure things down on the bottom as well. But everything here is generally like, about 15,000 and higher. I try to get coverage across various types of speakers, various brands that are popular, that are, have good relationships, good reputations, and have something that I thought was interesting or relevant to, looking at the comparison with the persona, right? So price is generally in the ballpark. I looked at the tweeter mid-range woofer configuration just to see what they're doing, what materials, what sizes and stuff like that. One thing to call out here, if you look at the tweeter materials, and I mentioned in my part 2 of this series that beryllium was, very exclusive and expensive material that you start seeing a lot of in the 5-figure and up price range, and you can see what I mean. So I have 17 speakers here. Out of the 17, literally 11 of them use beryllium for the tweeter. And again, different price ranges, but generally speaking, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 and up. But beryllium is definitely the most common material. In this price range, aluminum is actually more rare, mainly used by KEF here, as you can see. here and here. And then I added a couple of diamonds because diamond is the only other material that's maybe considered to be superior to beryllium in some circles, or at least on par. So definitely more expensive than beryllium. So I wanted to have a couple of options here to see what that could look like. In the mid-range, lots of different materials and setups, but beryllium in terms of mid-range, we got the two personas on the top here, the 7F and 5Fs. And then, like I mentioned, you don't see beryllium in the mid-range. The only other one here is the one I called out earlier, the TAD, R1TX uses beryllium. And then there's a beryllium upper mid-range cone that's used in the Martin that I mentioned as well in my previous video. Other than that, no beryllium. And then woofers, again, are all over the place. You see a lot of aluminum in general. It's common material. But yeah, you can see how many, what size. And that feeds into the frequency response. So the frequency response is probably the key spec that you could look at in terms of a reflection of a speaker's design and construction quality. Because the goal of a speaker manufacturer at the end of the day, if they're trying to build, especially like a flagship floor standing tower speaker, they want a speaker that can really reproduce the entire range of audible frequencies that human beings can hear and that, musical instruments can play, essentially. So that means everything from 20 hertz on the bottom end all the way up to at least 20 kilohertz on the top end. Now, when you get to speakers of this price range, you notice on the upper end, most of these are well above 20 kilohertz. And you might say, well, why do that if humans can't hear it? Well, the higher the upper frequency breakup point is, that's what that means. So once the cone starts breaking up and flexing at a certain frequency, it starts losing its composure, and then the overall frequency response, the flatness goes way off, goes way down. So you're not going to maintain the stability of the frequency response from the cone. So what you're looking at is basically the breakup point for that tweeter in this case. If a tweeter can go up to 45 kilohertz in the case of the Paradigm Personas, or 60 kilohertz with the ribbon and the monitor audio, stuff like that, that means that at the 20 kilohertz, which is the upper end of human hearing, it's going to be super stable and super reliable. So it's in a company's best interest to build over-engineer essentially a speaker that can go well above and beyond that, because it just means that it's going to be that much more stable and accurate in the audible band. That's the first part. The second thing is most of these frequency responses are taken on axis, meaning that the microphone is directly in front of the cone. But in the real world, people are sitting all around the speaker. And the frequency response tends to get much more narrow when people are sitting off axis. So if you can achieve 45 kilohertz on axis, for example, with the Persona, if you go to Paradigm website, you'll see that the off axis frequency response actually tops out at 20 kilohertz. So what that means is they're hitting the audible human range pretty much all around, no matter where you sit, which is another way to look at that, which is awesome. Some companies, they may have 30 kilohertz on axis, but in off axis, it's now 15 or something. So you're not going to hear the full bandwidth there. The other thing to point out here in the frequency response is this parentheses, in some cases where I put in parentheses plus or minus some other number. That's because generally speaking, frequency response is plus or minus 3 dB. That's the range, okay, that they looked at, kind of the wiggle room, so to speak, across the whole frequency band, to say, well, the speaker can basically play with these frequencies within this range. All right, the tighter that is, the more flat the line is. Instead of having a curve that has a certain amplitude, it'll be smaller until it's basically flat. That's the theory, right? Now, in the real world, there is no perfect speaker. No perfect speaker. No perfect material. The goal is to deliver full frequency bands using all kinds of materials and sophisticated crossovers to do a dedicated woofers that can focus on the low end, and a mid-range that focus on the middle, and a dedicated tweeter to focus on the highs. But nothing is perfect. So there is no plus or minus 0 dB, 20 to 20 kilohertz speaker. So plus or minus 3 dB standard, but as you see, Paradigm actually does theirs tighter. And it looks like Martin also does theirs tighter. So they actually specify a 2 dB window, which means that they're illustrating that this speaker is even more flat between the ranges specified. So if you were to look at this in the apples to apples way to compare to most of everything else on this list that is plus or minus 3 dB, the Paradigm Persona 7F, for example, will probably be something closer to like 22 hertz up to 50 kilohertz if it was plus or minus 3 dB. Now that's just, Paradigm doesn't specify that. They only do the plus or minus 2 dB. But just looking at it and just, knowing how frequency curves work, that's a general estimate, but I bet you it's not pretty far off. So we're looking at something closer to 22 and I would say 50. And if you think about those numbers, it pretty much compares favorably to almost everything on this list. Even things that are much bigger, if you look at the dimensions, or much more expensive if you're looking at the pricing. Okay, I mean, for example, even something like the Dale Corey, which I love, it's a great speaker. Talk about that more. But it's only rated down to 26 hertz and only up to 34 kilohertz, right? And even at plus or minus, and that's at plus or minus 3 dB, even with Paradigm Persona's 2 dB window, it's actually a wider frequency response than that. Now, disclaimer, looking at the frequency response on paper does not mean much of anything in terms of how the speaker will sound to your ear. In other words, a speaker that measures well or better by the manufacturer's claim doesn't necessarily mean it will sound better because it has a wider frequency, rated frequency response. There are plenty of people here that would say, for example, the Kef 1 Blades or Kef Blade Meta here only goes down to 35 hertz and only up to 35 hertz, kilohertz, sorry. There are plenty of other things on this list that are wider, but some people would say, hey, the bass is booming and they don't need a subwoofer and, like everything sounds superb with that. Same thing with something like Perlisten. I've heard the Perlistens in a room going full out on bass and fully pressurized in a room, even though it's only rated down to 32 hertz. So, it's just not that black or white necessarily, but I think it is a good reflection of the engineering and design that went into the speaker. Because if they're able to achieve a wide frequency response, that bodes well in terms of how enjoyable it will sound. In Paradigm Persona 7F in particular, the 9Hs are even better. They're rated down to 19 hertz and up to 45 plus or minus 2 dB. And that would be even wider, probably more like 17 or 18 hertz and up to 50 kilohertz if it was plus or minus 3 dB. So I just wanted to highlight that. Again, Paradigm Persona is looking really, really, really good. And they're full range at the 7F and 9H level. Now, the resistance and sensitivity, both of these factor into how easy the speaker is to drive, which is important because people think that the wattage coming from the amp, you've got 100 watts, 200 watts, that means loudness, and it doesn't. It's really a combination of the wattage plus the sensitivity on the speaker. The higher the sensitivity, okay, the easier it is for the speaker to play loudly. The less power that is required for the speaker to play loudly. Now, this is especially important for home theater because in home theater, you want, the sound to be live and dynamic, to go from super quiet to super loud and not feel strained and still be able to be accurate. So most like home theater focused speakers will have super high sensitivity ratings. The resistance here, again, the higher the number, the easier the speaker is as a load in the circuit, meaning that it's easier to power. It requires less power, again, from the amplifier. So something like a 4-ohm speaker here versus an 8-ohm speaker, the 4-ohm speaker will require twice as much power from the amplifier to play at the same level. Okay? Think about that. So it means that you need to have a bigger, beefier amp, which usually means more expensive amp in order for that speaker to play at the levels that you may want. It's going to be easier to do that at 8 ohms. So both of those, when you look at it, play into that home theater potential factor that I mentioned. If it's low resistance and low sensitivity, that's not going to bode well for home theater because it means it's not going to have as much dynamics. You remember, a lot of home theaters are powered by a receiver, which is fine. like a multi-channel receiver, they don't have the most robust power supplies. So you don't want to throw something that's like 4 ohms and 80 something dB sensitivity. That's going to be a lot harder to do. So that's what I mean by the home theater potential, at least partly. Weight, other thing to call out, looking at just weight, it's generally speaking a reflection of the craftsmanship and the material and construction work that went into the cabinet and the drivers and the crossover, etc. Generally speaking, weight is a good thing for speakers. The more weight, that means the higher quality materials used and the more inert the cabinet will likely be. It's no coincidence that the most inert cabinets are things like the Acura Acoustics, which I don't have here, but they use granite rock for their whole entire cabinet and they weigh like 300 pounds. Not a coincidence. Magico, which I do have here, are prided on using aluminum metal for their entire cabinets because they feel that's the only way to achieve full inertness in the cabinet. And their speakers generally are really, really dense. The Magico S3 is much smaller than this 7F, but if you look here, you'll see that it's 170 pounds and the 7F is only 144 pounds. So even though this speaker is generally smaller, it weighs a lot more because it's so dense because they use aluminum metal. But you got to look at it like apples to apples. If you look at the Persona 7F, that's the flagship, the highest, the biggest passive speaker that Paradigm makes now. Compare the weight there, 144 pounds, to the previous flagship speaker, which was the Signature S8. The Signature S8 had 6 drivers in it, right? It was this big cabinet, tall, very skinny though, but it only weighed 100 pounds. So that goes to show you 6 drivers in there and, this cabinet to fit them all, it weighed only 100 pounds. The 7F has 2 less drivers than that, and it still weighs 144 pounds. And of course the 9H with its 6 drivers and power amplifiers built in for the woofers, it actually weighs 196 pounds, almost 200 pounds. So that goes to show you what Paradigm has done, how much more attention they are paying in the Persona in terms of the cabinetry and making sure that thing is inert in terms of the weight, the material, the density of everything. Remember, I said they use high density fiberboard, like fiberglass. So it's a really, really dense wood material, something that they did not use previously. So there you go. Now, that said, you guys have probably seen it here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here so you can see the full ranking I have here. And again, I'm not going to go through everything here, but the key takeaways, the Persona 7F is not a perfect speaker. And I reflect that here. It's not perfect. Price, I gave it 8. It's 27 grand. It's not cheap. There are other things that are a little bit cheaper or near the price that are pretty darn close in a lot of respects. The key thing to look at here, I love the look, which is really important to me, aesthetics. I've talked about that. Gave it a 10. But the key thing here is I gave the music's performance a 9, and I gave the home theater potential a 9. Right? So I look at the Persona 7F in particular as being pretty great at both music and home theater. Not perfect, but great at both. And if you look down in this list, there is no other speaker in this ranking here where I feel they both are equal or better at both music and home theater. There's nothing else here I gave a 9 to both or higher if you look at it. And that's important to me for my current use case. Like I said, I mostly have a home theater I use for gaming, for TV, for movies. And music right now is probably, honestly, the least used aspect. I'm hoping that getting these speakers will actually increase that because I love listening to music. And I want to be able to do it at a higher level and really get immersed in it and stuff like that. I'm hoping that's what this is about, is elevating my music. But the home theater part is important to me. So a lot of these speakers, as great as they may be for music, as crazy as they are, expensive and, exotic materials, they don't have good home theater potential. Either because they don't even make home theater speakers. They don't have a series. So I don't have a way to match with a center and a surround. I don't have a way to even match the brand. So that's a big part of it. So things like, for example, the Kef Blade 1, there's no Kef Blade center, as far as I know. There's no Kef Blade, surround. Now there's a Kef reference surround you can use. Kev reference center you can use, I guess, but there's nothing actually to match the Blade. Something like the Tad reference one. Look, I gave it a 10. It's to me, like I said, it's my favorite. It's the best sounding speaker out there. But if I'm really looking to get it for what I'm looking for an LCR, left, center, right. And I already have surrounds that are Paradigm, right? So that obviously kind of goes in favor of Paradigm, sticking with that at least. But if I was going to go out, I'm like, hey, I need to get surrounds now to match, because you want to have all of your speakers generally be at least of the same brand, because they're going to be timbre match, and that means they're voiced a certain way to get you a much more consistent sound field. You don't want to necessarily have one brand for this and one brand for that. I mean, in some cases, like I have SVS, elevation speakers from my heights. They're just the height. They're not delivering a whole lot of sound. But at least for the main bed, you want, even that, some people say you will want to match that. And maybe someday I will. But, even with at least the base around bed of 5.1 or 7.1, you really want to have them match. So that's not possible with the TAD at all. And then the TAD is $145,000. So the price here is the lowest. It's 2. Because there's no way. That's like, literally, over 5 times, right? The price of what I'm looking at for the 7Fs. And that's already at the edge of my budget. So, and then there's, like I said, no center. If there was a center, obviously it would be way out there. If the speakers cost that much, the center is probably 50 grand by itself, right? So that's not practical, right? And that's why, that's on the bottom here, even though it's probably the best overall sounding speaker I've heard, period, right? You got things like, again, the Magico, everyone loves. I've talked about how they sound boring to me, but yet and still I recognize they're probably as good as you're going to get in terms of overall performance. They have a look at what they're working with. They got a diamond plus beryllium tweeter. It's a diamond coating on a beryllium tweeter, right? It's insane. They have crazy materials. They have carbon material for the mid range and for the woofers. It's a really, really wide frequency range. I mean, on paper, it's great. Home theater potential is going to be pretty low because why? Because it's a 4 ohm 88 rated thing. It's going to be a harder load. You need to have a good amount of power, and it's not going to be the most dynamic speaker. I'll tell you that right now. So that's why that's lower. Aesthetics, I think actually the new S3 looks amazing. I think it looks really, really good. I think it's really attractive. The price, it's $45,000, right? It's literally, almost pretty much double, when I'm looking at the 7Fs. So for double the price, is it twice as good anyway? No, I wouldn't say so at all, right? So that's why, for example, that kind of falls in the middle. The Focal Sopra, I actually love. That was, at one point, I was actually going to get Sopra. They have a series of Sopras, so the home theater potential is up there. It's not, they don't focus on home theater quite as much as Paradigm, especially at this level, which is why it's a little bit under. I have some horror stories trying to follow up and get information about the Focal, like, home theater package Sopra for the Sopra line, but, so it's a little bit less than the Persona. I think it's roughly about the same in terms of overall performance. I gave it a 9. Aesthetics, I think they look pretty good. The Sopras are my favorite of the Focal looking speakers. Price, it's better than a 7F because it's cheaper, right? Right? It's 22 grand versus 27 grand, so I got to give it a little bit more points there. But overall, it just fell a little bit short because it's a little bit less on home theater, and a little bit less on what I'm calling the in-game status, right? That's pretty much what it came down to for me. But they're pretty close, all right? Pearlisten, I'm calling out Pearlisten because I think Pearlisten is probably one of the best two-way speakers out there as well. They're a new company, but they measure extremely well. They came out the gate talking about their massive subwoofer collection, which have gotten just rave reviews. They were the first company to have THX dominance rating for their subwoofers and speakers. So they actually came out probably with a little bit more of a home theater focus, to be honest. But, they've been at high-end shows as well, trying to highlight their music capabilities as well. I've heard them side by side with the Persona 7F, and ultimately, to me, side by side with the Persona 9Hs, and the 9H beat them as they should, because the 9Hs are like $37,000. So that's like over double the price compared to the $18,000 right for the per listen. So they should have beat them. They did. I gave the home theater potential even a little bit more because they have a full range, surrounds, Atmos height speakers. They're doing custom installation, CI stuff now. They have a full range of subwoofers that are awesome that actually I still would want to get potentially as my in-game subs. They're really expensive though, but they are the truth. Per listen doing their thing. They're not the last word in music performance per se, but they are high end. They are high end for sure. But their weakest thing is probably the aesthetics. They're slim. They're not, they don't weigh too much, but they're ugly. They're not the prettiest speakers. And this is not just me saying this. They got the memo. So you might have noticed there's a limited edition version of these speakers that they're making right now. And they have completely redone the exterior. They have an actual like glossy paint coating now and stuff like that. So it looks better. I got a feeling they're going to keep up with that going forward. And that means the price is going to be a lot more expensive. But as it is now, S7Ts, great speakers, great two-way speakers for a little less money. I would say that they would probably do better than the 5S, for example, especially for home theater as a two-way speaker. But yeah, aesthetics got to get up there. Let's just put it like that. It's up there. What else? I mean, I think you guys get the point. Bowers and Wilkins, the 802 Diamonds is the best diamond speaker that I think Bowers and Wilkins have made. I never was a huge fan of the Diamond series. They just never sounded stellar to me, but they sound good. The D4s sound good. 8, that's a solid score. They're definitely high end. I don't think you can do wrong. Home theater potential, Bowers and Wilkins makes a full range across everything, so that's there. Aesthetics, that's to each his own with the whole look of their box. I hated it before, I'm not gonna lie, but the D4 actually makes some subtle improvements that overall makes it look a lot better to me. I gave it an 8. I think it looks good, and it's finally something I would do. Before, the aesthetics was just like I could never have that in my house. I just couldn't. But now I think it's doable. Price, the 802, which is their second to highest one, is what, 26? I think the highest one is now what, 37, 38, somewhere around there. So they're pretty close in line with the Persona series, to be honest. Gave it an 8. And yeah, it's a solid speaker for sure. What else? Focal Utopia line. I love the Focal Utopia. One reason why the Sopra Endgame is only 8.5 for me is because even Focal acknowledges there are better things out there. They have the Utopia line. Utopia is meant to be their be-all flagship, and it is. It's one of the most high-end and best speakers you can get. The Maestro is their third to highest, and that's the one that I would look at. If money with no object. The Maestro is $74,000. It's well out my price range, but I just wanted to put it here to look at it. Again, sound wise, you're not going to do much better than that. You're not going to do any better than that. I gave it a 10. Home theater potential though, they do have a center speaker. They do have a bookshelf. They're ridiculously expensive. A Utopia like cinema home theater package would just be prohibitively expensive. I mean, if the speakers themselves are 74 grand, that center speaker gotta be, I want to say like 20 to 30 grand. The bookshelves are also about that 20 grand ish, I think, somewhere around there. So, dude, like we're talking well over $100,000 for just a 5.1 package. That's why it's not very practical, but they do have it technically. Focal Maestro also is surprisingly efficient with 93 dB sensitivity, as you see here. 6 ohms, which honestly is probably closer to the true resistance on the Persona as well. But that's a pretty efficient speaker. So it's not the hardest speaker to drive, considering how high end it is. Aesthetics, I think it looks good. I do. I think it looks great. Price, again, $74,000 is nowhere near my price range. It's got to be low for that. In-game status. Where do you go from a Focal Utopia speaker? Nowhere. Nowhere really, right? I mean, at that point, it's just, again, about aesthetics. It's about your room and what your needs are. But in terms of just raw performance, overall, still pretty much like the best speaker you can get out there, right? And, so that's kind of where I was sitting. So I think you guys get the point. The point here is that there is more to it just than the musical performance and just the performance overall. Dale Corey, I love that speaker. The Martin, I've shown you guys that. Diamond tweeter, beryllium mid range with the ceramic mid range as well for the lower mids, whatever. Beautiful, beautiful speaker. Aesthetics and performance is a 10. The speaker is 117 grand. Not practical at all. So the price is way down, and it's no home theater potential with that in that speaker whatsoever. So that's kind of why something like that would be down. In game status, you can't do much better. You're not going anywhere from there. Sanus Faber, their reference collection stuff is supreme. They are another one that use diamond and beryllium, diamond coated beryllium, which is insane. Music performance, I only gave this a 9 because this is like the entry level to their reference line, so they do have other speakers in their reference line that do sound better, right? So I'll give it a 9. Home theater potential, not much. Sanus Faber does make a full range in general, but not really in their reference line. Aesthetics, supreme. This is not their prettiest speaker, but all of the Sanus Faber stuff to me are beautiful. So at least a 9. Might even be like a 9.5. But yeah, price, again, this one is a limited edition speaker. I don't think you can technically even get it now. But it's $58,000 for that limited edition. That's the entry level to the reference line. So everything is higher than that as you go into the reference line. And the reference line is where you start seeing the beryllium being used. Other than that, Sanus Faber uses like a soft dome, so it's different. But yeah, I love Sanus Faber. This is probably like where I would ideally want to at least start looking at. Not going to do too much better in terms of music and everything, but really expensive. Not much. Not a great two-way option. That's what it comes down to. So get the point. And you see how things, even when they sound great, these other factors come in and it kind of affects the overall score. But if I was looking for something, yeah, the Persona 7Fs genuinely still came out ahead. The in-game status, how satisfied am I going to be? There's a 90% chance that I would never feel the need. 90% chance I would never feel the need to upgrade again. That's kind of what that 9 out of 10 means. There's going to be a Persona like version 2 or something else that Paradigm is going to be working on. We might hear about it as early as next year. It might be later, but we'll see. Obviously, they're going to keep moving ahead. I think whatever they do, the price is going to be way higher than the current Persona. And there's reason for that. I might talk about that in a whole nother video. But it's coming. It might not be practical. Again, when you look at all of these, I might not like the look as much. They may decide to not do a full home theater line with this new series. They might only have a 2-channel option. Who knows? I don't know. Again, I think the price is going to go up, meaning that this value here will go down to 6, 7, maybe even 5. In-game status might go up, but not by much, because I think the current personas are pretty darn close to in-game. So that's kind of the story, and you put that together, I feel like the Persona comes out on top. The specs work great. It's a great two-way option, like I said. It's a nice size. It's not too big, but it's big enough to make a statement in the room, which is kind of what I want, and to fill up a large room. Great construction. Overall, man, I mean, I looked, and this doesn't obviously show like what it felt like to hear some of these things. I mean, there's nothing on here I would say that sounds bad, and that anyone, if you liked it for whatever reason, you would be doing wrong. These are all just some examples of some world-class speakers in different ways that are using top-notch materials and design and manufacturing techniques to deliver a speaker that is pretty much as close to disappearing as you can get. That's the goal of the speaker, is to disappear and only deliver the sound to you, not add anything else. And what you don't realize is a lot of the sound you hear from speakers, from your TV, from your phone, from your car, the sound bar. I mean, those speakers at that level, they add a lot of distortion. It's distortion because additional information that's not in the source. So they add a lot of extra stuff, noise, to the sound. You don't realize it because you don't know what it sounds like for it not to be there. You just get used to it, and you're like, okay, this is what that sounds like until it's removed. And it's a weird feeling when you look at a speaker and it's on, but it doesn't. Your brain is telling you that there's just sound in the room. That's what we're going for, and that's what all of these speakers I think can do to some extent fairly well. So you can't really go wrong. But this was kind of my method to the madness. I went over this thing, I combed over this thing. Some of these numbers, I might add a point or, plus or minus a point here and there, or 0.5 points here and there. But I think the takeaway is generally still the same, So there it is, guys. Just wanted to lay it out for you. There it is, guys. Hopefully you found this video useful. I enjoyed thinking about this stuff and sharing this with you. I think it's important to just see, how someone that's deep into this stuff really thinks. But like I said, I've been arguing with a lot of folks about this because they're just, oh, this sounds. I'm like, it may be, But even stuff that I didn't capture there, just like about how available something is, you can only hear what's available, what's around. There's some speakers that are extremely niche, and you're like, oh, you can order it from them direct from Norway or something, right? But I don't even see that at one of the shows like that I go to, or there's no dealer anywhere near me. I got to take a plane to even just listen to it. Like, that's not attractive either. So there's that kind of stuff as well. But hopefully this all makes sense. Let me know what you think and what your thought process is. Or do you just care about sound? Go to a dealer, go to a friend's house, hear something get done. Or do all of these other factors really play into you for you as well? You got to think about how it's going to look in your home, your living room, or whatever room you have, your music room, your theater room. How your family going to perceive it? You have kids and a dog, which I do as well. How vulnerable it is to them, like that kind of stuff. There's a lot to it. And again, when you get to this level, it's all going to sound great. So just enjoy it, man, for real. True Techno Gamer. That's all for now. End of part 3, so at the end of my series. From now on, hopefully the next videos will be me showing you these new speakers in my home, giving you guys impressions and all that good stuff. So lots of fun to come. But let me know what you think. Like, subscribe. I really, really appreciate if you are made it this far and listening to this. But till next video, True Techno Gamer signing off.